Welcome to this afternoon's post-cabinet media conference. I have with me here today two of my colleagues, the Honorable Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts, Dr. Nyan Gatsby-Dolly, and the Minister of Health, the Honorable Terence Dial Singh. And we'll start with asking the Honorable Minister of Health to address us.
Thank you very much, Minister Young. Happy Carnival to members of the media and to the listening public. It is my duty this morning as Minister of Health to put some facts into the public domain as it regards the cost of Central Block and what the public is getting for just over $1.1 billion. Because I don't want the media to be misled by those who are either uninformed or who have an agenda of their own. Let me state clearly the following facts. The Point Fortin Hospital is a 100-bed facility, which we as a government reduced the price from 1.5 million to 1.2 billion. Sorry, 1.5 billion to 1.2 billion. It is being put into the public domain that $300 million in savings was because we reduced the scope of the facility. Let me clearly say that this government did not touch 1 square foot of that building. The cost savings were due only to renegotiations of UDCOT fees. Let me state that clearly. The Point Fortin Hospital was conceived as a 100-bed facility and will be delivered as a 100-bed facility. The plans were not adjusted. That is misinformation one. On the Arima Hospital, it was conceived as a 150-bed facility, and this government will be delivering a 150-bed facility. What has changed, like Point Fortin, is a reduction in UDCOT fees by saving another $200 million. So Arima was supposed to come in at 1.8 billion. It will now come in at 1.6 billion. Again, not touching 1 square foot of space. That is the misinformation being put out there by the United National Congress. By comparison, the Couva facility, which is a 240-bed facility, came in at 1.5 billion. So I'm giving you all those as comparators, and I will now explain again what the taxpayer is getting for 1.1 billion at Port of Spain Central Block. Point Fortin, let me just remind you, 100 beds, 1.2 billion. Arima, 150 beds, now 1.6 billion. Port of Spain Central Block, you are getting 540 beds, which is 5 times the size of Point Fortin, and probably just about 2.5 times the size of Arima, and more than twice the size of Couva in terms of bed space. But for $1.1 billion, what is the taxpayer getting at Port of Spain? 540 beds. In that, you are getting 10 new operating theaters, 10 new ICU beds, intensive care unit beds, 10 new high dependency unit beds. You are getting a coronary care unit. You are getting an ICU for children. You are getting the following departments: internal medicine, hematology, psychiatry, general surgery, neurosurgery, urology, orthopedics, plastics, radiology, full lab facilities, and psychiatry. The other piece of misinformation being put out by the UNC is that for 1.1 billion, you are not getting equipment. Let me state categorically that that is untrue, and let me tell you what sort of major medical equipment the taxpayer is getting at the Port of Spain Central Block, the new Central Block. An MRI. Port of Spain does not have an MRI. You'll be getting 2 new CT scanners, 2 new X-ray machines. For the first time in Port of Spain, you will get in a catheterization lab. That is to do procedures like angiograms and so on, which we currently have to send out into the private sector, because the only public sector facilities with a catheterization lab to do procedures like angiograms is at Eric Williams. San Fernando does not have one. We are putting in one now. We are going for the first time in Port of Spain to have machines to do bone density testing. So the Port of Spain Central Block, 540 beds, is a complete hospital. The only thing we are not recreating is an accident and emergency, because there's already one. I want you, as responsible members of the media, to juxtapose $1.1 billion for a 540-bed hospital as opposed to $1.2 billion for a 100-bed in Point Fortin, $1.6 billion for a 150-bed facility in Arima, and $1.5 billion for Couva. By any stretch of the imagination, that is value for money, and the cost per bed for the Central Block in Port of Spain is significantly less than what we have built other facilities for in the recent past. The Central Block, may I reiterate, and I was most disappointed in my colleague, the member for Barataria San Juan, when I last was before you and I announced Central Block. An urgent question came to the Prime Minister asking if we decanted Central Block so we could award a contract. That is the height of irresponsibility, because everyone knows that Central Block should have been priority number 1 for any government from 2009. And that is the level of misinformation being put out there. And I just wanted to put these facts on the table for members of the media and for the general public. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Dayal Singh, and now Minister Gatsby Dolly.
Good afternoon to the members of the media and the viewing public, and listening public as well. It is my duty on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago to extend warm greetings for an enjoyable and safe Carnival 2019. We've had a very long season, one of our longest, and we have had a proliferation, as usual, of events, going from the fetes to the Calypso tents, to the different workshops and so that would have taken place around the country. And we are looking forward to our Carnival season being one that is enjoyable to all. Whether or not you play mass or what you do, a lot of us take part in the Carnival time in different ways, and that I think makes our Carnival unique. So whether you're going to relax at home, or you're going to go out to the regional carnivals, or you're going to go out to camp, as many people do, in the rural parts of the country, whether you are going to actually play mass or whether you'll be a spectator, we want to wish everyone in the country a very safe, enjoyable season, and hope that this carnival brings to you what you would like to get out of it as we go into the season. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are just 3 issues that I'd like to address as Minister of National Security. The first issue as Minister of National Security is a warning to our citizens and to the visitors to Trinidad and Tobago, especially during this carnival period, of a drug that seems to be circulating. I was given a briefing in the last 2 days of the proliferation, unfortunately, of a drug commonly known as ecstasy. Apparently, ecstasy is being used quite widely at a lot of parties and a lot of events, and carnival being a culmination of a lot of this partying activity, etc. We've picked up a few thousand of these tablets, and in fact I was provided with some information that shows there's 16 different types and makes of these ecstasy tablets that we have picked up from raids, etc. thus far. So I wanted to use this opportunity as we go into the final stretch, as they say, of the carnival celebrations, to just warn persons to please be careful As you know, the use of drugs, illegal drugs, is against the law and it's a criminal offense. But more than that, as the Minister of National Security and as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I'm very concerned about our citizens or any visitors, etc., falling prey or utilizing drugs that may have various effects on individuals. So this particular drug of ecstasy, we've also been working with the UN and they've been assisting us. I thank them for providing us with some testing machines for these types of drugs that we're utilizing, etc. So that's the first point, to just issue a warning. Please refrain from the use of drugs like ecstasy, and please be careful and be aware of these drugs. Very often, as you all would have seen in international media stories, there may be bad mixes, etc. Persons may react differently to these drugs, etc. And we would not want individuals to be harmed unnecessarily through the use of these illegal drugs. So please be careful. The second point I'd like to deal with today is something that I've been addressing over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, and that's with respect to the government policy with Venezuelans. And I'm going to state it here, hopefully clearly, for one of the last times until the decision is made. I am intending to bring to the next cabinet sitting, for the consideration of my cabinet colleagues, a policy dealing specifically with Venezuelans in Trinidad and Tobago. The first point I'd like to make, and it's a point I've been making this week, the Election and Boundaries Commission will not be involved in this registration process at all. In the first instance, as I've said repeatedly over the past few days, what I intend to ask Cabinet to do is to have a registration process over a specific period of time, and basically we'll provide an amnesty for all Venezuelans who are here in Trinidad and Tobago, legally or illegally, to come and register. You will be required to come and register. That registration process will be handled by the Ministry of National Security. Immigration falls under us. We're going to be looking at the type of the methodology we'll be using for registration. One of the outputs of that registration process is to give each Venezuelan citizen who was registered an identification card. That identification card allows us to register the data and to have for the first time accurate data as to the number of Venezuelans who are here in Trinidad and Tobago. We have heard tens of thousands being bandied about as loose figures. If you consider the population of Tobago is around, I believe, 60,000, a maximum of, I think, around 80,000, you begin to understand that the figures being bandied around are very unlikely to be true. But rather than speculate, I'm going to be asking my cabinet colleagues and the government to take a decision to allow us to register all legal and illegal Venezuelans who are here in Trinidad, provide them with an identification card. As part of the policy, I intend to propose to Cabinet to allow them to work here, those who have registered during this period of time, to work here for a year in the first instance. Persons, as I've said, have asked, well, what happens after that year? We are sincerely hoping that Venezuela during the period of a year will stabilize and things will get better in Venezuela with the stabilization of their internal affairs, and then persons will want to move back home. If that does not happen, because I certainly don't have the ability to predict the future, we will deal with it closer to the time. But in the first instance, it is essential and critical that as a government, we register the Venezuelans who are here so we know exactly who is here. And as part of that registration process, subsequent to your registration, we will be attempting to do a verification exercise. So we're well aware that maybe people who are not Venezuelans would try to utilize this and to attempt to get registered, etc. If we find, it will be the policy I'll be proposing to Cabinet, if we find that anyone who has broken or provided us with false information or broken the law in that registration process, we will move to deport you. Thereafter, once the amnesty period is closed off and the registration period is closed off, we would be asking, of course, that all of these Venezuelans come here through the legal ports of entry. If you're found to have come in illegally thereafter, the normal law will apply to you. As part of this process and the registration, as I said a couple days ago, we will not be seeking to detain anyone who comes to register in that process if you're here illegally. It's an opportunity for you to come and register legally, to get your registration card, to to work for a year, provided all of this is subject to cabinet approval. I have seen the continuation, in fact it was sent to me by someone, the continuation of a narrative by a UNC page and also by UNC personnel that the EBC is going to be involved. Yes, Minister Dennis Moses some time ago in a statement in Parliament, towards the end of the statement, before national security took on in the earnest that we are doing now for this registration process, suggested that it may be possible that the EBC would be consulted. The answer is we are not proceeding. The EBC has no role to play in this. I've said this repeatedly this week. The EBC itself, I saw, put out a statement that they have not been approached, and the answer why they have not been approached is because when I sat down and started to develop the policy, there was no way that we were going to evolve the EBC. So any continued attack by the opposition or any opposition parties on the Election and Boundaries Commission is to be deplored and is absolutely rejected by the government, because the EBC is a working independent body. And I'd like to put us citizens on notice. Once again, I am seeing the attack on part of independent bodies in our society by the opposition. And this is something that should not be encouraged. And I repeat for the last time this afternoon, the EBC will play absolutely no role in the registration of Venezuelans. I can say that also international bodies reached out. The church reached out to assist with the process. So for example, there was a suggestion of using the UNHCR as part of the registration process. The answer is thank you, but no thanks. Again, I don't want this to be confused with any refugee status or any seeking of asylum. This is a pure registration of who is here on the ground by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. The last thing I'd like to say before we open for questions is to join with my colleague, Minister Gatsby Dolly, but now from a national security point of view, to say I commend the men and women of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Fire Services, Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force or Intelligence Services, and any other law enforcement bodies that have played a part. We've had a very long run up to Carnival, longer than we've had in the past few years, and so far there have been no major incidents. I think persons will agree with me, by and large, the law enforcement authorities in Trinidad and Tobago, with the support of our defense force, and I'm telling you, driven by intelligence operations, we have had quite a successful period leading up to now. As we go into the final stretch, I can tell you that our final plans are in place, and I hope that we will be able to announce on Ash Wednesday we've had a good carnival without incident. The men and women of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, our Defence Force, our intelligence agencies, the Fire Service will be out in their numbers. We will continue to do all that we've been doing to keep persons safe and to provide safety and security for everyone. And I hope that we will have a incident-free carnival. I really look forward to that. Ask persons to just be aware of your surroundings, to use the normal precautions, always walk in groups, careful as to the amount of alcohol that you consume and these other types of things, and to know that the men and women of our defense force, our protective services, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the other arms of national security will be working as we have been around the clock, and I commend them for the work that they've done thus far. At this stage, I'll invite questions. Yes. State.
UN and other assistance. What about...
I didn't say I rejected the state. I was very careful. I said thank you, but no thanks.
Okay.
Decline. I decline.
All right. What about living waters? Let's see.
As I say, correct. Now, and that is why we took a decision to decline the assistance. UNHCR and Living Waters are working together to deal with persons seeking asylum. That is a completely different concept to what the government is seeking to do. What we're basically doing right now is telling all Venezuelans, as I say, whether you're here legally or illegally, come and register. We'll allow you to stay in Trinidad and to work for the period of a year, and they get those benefits. The BIR has reached out to me at certain levels saying, well, what about the registration of, if they're going to be working here for a year, provision of BIR numbers to ensure that health surcharge and these types of things are paid. Of course, we all know in Trinidad and Tobago you have to earn over a certain amount of money a month. I think it's $6,000 now before you start to be liable for PAYE and taxes and these types of things. So those are the specifics we're looking at. So we're not rejecting any help. We'll continue to work with UNHCR and Living Waters on the asylum seeking, and that affects citizens of other countries, etc. But this process is not about asylum seeking or refugee status, which is why I was very careful. No EBC involvement, no UNHCR and Living Waters involvement in the registration process.
There be some intersection, because if I
Yes, there would be, because if you're already registered with Living Waters and UNHCR, that doesn't disappear.
correctly, I remember one of the things the Attorney General said in Parliament is that a lot of the asylum seekers are moving a lot more slowly through the system in terms of third countries wanting to accept them. So a lot of them are in fact remaining here for a considerable period of time. So we will have this group. I mean, they may be seeking asylum, but in reality, they'll be our responsibility.
Correct. Well, two things I'll say with response to that. First, as you've heard us say, with respect to asylum and refugee status, we don't have domestic legislation dealing with that. But we've been acting in a humanitarian manner. We've been accepting the assistance of the UNHCR, and bodies like Living Waters are playing an important role in that refugee asylum seeking process. This doesn't change that in any way. One of the difficulties with that process is, as the Attorney General pointed out on a number of occasions, I believe, you apply and then you're literally waiting on the UN to then place you in another country, and very, very, very small percentage actually go on. I am dealing here specifically with the Venezuelans and the situation that has been created by the instability and the difficulties taking place internally in Venezuela. So that's what I'm dealing with in the first instance.
Then, in the country who have already applied for asylum, and they are not allowed to work under the current the current policy for refugees. So will that be waived for them?
But again, there's no current policy for refugees. So to work legally in Trinidad and Tobago right now, according to our laws in Trinidad and Tobago, and this is not only with Venezuelans, this is anyone who is not a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, you have to be granted a work permit or ministerial permit. So those persons would not have been granted work permits, and that is why they're not working. It has nothing to do with the fact that they're registered with the UNHCR. That has absolutely nothing to do with that. So, but I've just said all Venezuelans who register will be, and now this is all subject to cabinet approval. I am not cabinet, so it's subject to my colleagues agreeing with the policy I intend to take to them. Once you've registered, in the first instance, you'll be allowed to work, and the Minister of National Security can do that under the immigration laws. So right now, all of those persons who are unable to work legally is because they're not granted any work permits or ministerial permits under the legislation. It would, yeah. It would include whoever comes to register themselves, and I'm asking everybody, register yourself. So if you're an asylum seeker and you choose not to register, and let's say your process comes to an end and they say, well, I'm not placing Stuart Young, the asylum seeker, so that brings it to an end, I will deport Stuart Young.
Common concerns and seem about this work fair year. Some people are afraid that Venezuelan nationals will be replacing local labor, making the job market even more competitive and harder to get into. And secondly, the exploitation of these nationals by employers who look to them as cheap labor, like we see what happens in Mexico, in the US with the Mexicans.
All right, let me respond to that. I don't know what happens in the US with respect to Mexicans. What I can tell you about is Trinidad and Tobago. Part of the drive and the decision to register Venezuelans and to allow them the opportunity to work for that period of a year in the first instance is to deal with the exploitation. So once they're now legal, and if we go the further step and they get registered with the BIR, etc., they now have rights. So the persons who are exploiting them right now, paying under the counter, paying them in cash, maltreating them, etc., it is because they know that they can hold something over their head. Well, if you don't do this, I'm going to call the immigration department, I'm going to call the police, they're going to come and hold you, detain you, take you down to the IDC, you'll be deported, etc. So you'll be lifting that. With respect to the conversation as to replacement of the local workforce, at the end of the day, the jobs exist, local workforce is open to them to apply for the jobs, etc. And I guess it will be, may the best person win. We see how it unfolds. Again, I don't want to speculate at this stage. And right now, whilst we feel that there's a high number, well, I don't personally feel, but why the public conversation seems to be, look, there's going to be a high number of Venezuelans who are here and they're going to flood the place. Until we get the real data, we're not quite sure as to how many Venezuelans it is we're talking about, which is why I drew the comparative analysis to the whole population of Tobago. Just 1 second, Ms. No, not in the first instance. So in the first instance, what I intend to take to Cabinet is say for a period of time, it may very well be 2 weeks, and we'll have to make sure that wherever it is they have to go to be registered are properly manned, we have the proper infrastructure, etc. in place. It could be a month. That has not been determined as yet. Come in and register. That's your amnesty period. Come and register during that period. Thereafter, if you're not registered, then we revert to the law referring.
You can come to Trinidad right now. They have 2 weeks here where we could just register.
This isn't meant to be a pull factor. As I've also been saying, we've tightened up on the borders. So, for example, I was in Moruga a couple of days ago and speaking about some of the operations that were launched down on the southern coast that have been preventing. I can tell you, as I came out of Cabinet this morning, and we had a complete closure, and we weren't having vessels bringing persons in. As I came out of Cabinet, between there and here, I picked up from persons on the ground that a vessel had come in and we were about to intercept it, etc. So we'll continue to do those things. We'll continue to apply the laws, continue to have our borders as locked down as we possibly can.
Will children be allowed to go to school on this register?
Those policy decisions have not been taken as yet.
Okay, well then I guess...
Is it part of the framework?
Those decisions haven't been, because of course to make, I can only answer one person at a time. So let's go with Ms. Bridgelal and then come back to Mrs. Sam.
Asking if they can travel in and out of the country might also be preempted.
Correct. I mean, we had an incident over the weekend that actually had me quite concerned. So someone, I think it's a Venezuelan, had sought the same refugee status and asylum status from the UNHCR, gotten their card or whatever the form is from them, and then picked up themselves, went on a plane, went to the Dominican Republic for a period of time. Of course, the Dominican Republic rejected them, so they then were coming back to they stayed for a time, coming back into Trinidad, didn't have that documentation, so they were rejected entry, sent back to DR. DR at that stage sent them back to Trinidad. But kudos and compliments to the immigration staff. They had an inquiry. The person said, look, I have my UNHCR card, etc., and they were provided an order of supervision and allowed out. That obviously is not something I'd want to encourage. So Trinidad is not a place that you could just, if you're here for certain circumstances, I do expect you to be coming and going every weekend and these types of things.
Venezuela would be allowed.
If you want to go to Venezuela, by all means go back to Venezuela.
No. Coming and going to and from.
Again, those are things that would be worked out. But yes, I think once the period is granted and you're registered and you have that period of a year, then we will allow you for the year. But certainly if we see from a national security point of view now, when we see persons traveling too frequently to certain places and a suspicion arises, the normal law is going to apply. We've been entitled to pull you in, to interview you, to interrogate you, to ask questions, to ask Interpol if there any information. And if it's found, or there's a reasonable suspicion that crosses a certain level that you're engaged in criminal activity, by all means I'll send you back.
Legal and illegal Venezuelan nationals are welcome to apply to register.
Absolutely, yeah.
Is there a certain cutoff for how long they were here before, or is it that if someone comes on a boat tomorrow and they held a still listen, I came here for the amnesty?
Well, the amnesty isn't in place as yet. So if you come here tomorrow or you come here today, well, when it becomes a policy, all right, because we're not going to amend the law. Yeah, so if it becomes a policy, as I said in answer to Ms. Hassan Ali, it's going to be for a period of time. So, okay, so I expect at any point that you're pushing during that period of time, there may be persons who try to make their entry in here, they come and register. That is why I'm not inclined to suggest to my cabinet colleagues it is for a long space of time, for a space, for example, of a month, because you're just opening it up for the opportunity for a pull factor for persons to rush during that month. The shorter the period, the less risk there is of that.
Do you anticipate that some of our CARICOM colleagues might feel, how should I put it, might feel a bit upset because many of their nationals come here, and we've had complaints from the governments. Their nationals come here and they're held in the detention center and they're not given.
CARICOM nationals held in the detention center.
And
Jamaicans
people
are
who stay
not
in
held
the-
in, you mean when they overstay,
Yeah,
etc.?
They are coming to some of them are looking to, they're economic migrants in the same way. There may not be turmoil in their countries, but they are seeking to better themselves, and that there may be a feeling that, we may be favoring Venezuelans in a way that we have not been.
Like when we had a policy that when there was the hurricane in Dominica and we opened our doors for Dominicans, you mean somebody from St. Vincent and St. Kitts may say, well, I wasn't hit by a hurricane, why ain't giving me the same bly? Okay, I think the easy answer to that, Ms. Tate, is recently, right here, I think in December, there was a special heads of CARICOM government meeting, and that was with respect to CSME. And at that meeting, the heads of government agreed to pursue CSME, to open it up, and we're working towards that. So that deals with it. They've also sought to expand within that grouping of CSME into the skill set, not only persons that we may call professionals with tertiary education, etc., but for example, to expand domestic workers and domestic helpers, as well as security officers and these types of things, which some may argue at the lower end of the income earning bracket, to facilitate exactly that. So I would hope that our CARICOM brothers and sisters would not feel discriminated against, if that's the right word to use, but rather understand that we are literally 7 miles, it's actually less than 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela. So as a CARICOM nation, we are the ones who are directly and most affected by this, and it's something that we're working hard to deal with in a humanitarian manner.
So will we seek to sort of explain to them what?
The Prime Minister is coming back in tonight. He's having a press conference at 8 o'clock. I don't want to preempt anything he may say, but he has just spent the last couple of days with the heads of CARICOM, and I'm sure they would have had quite a lot of robust discussion, and I'm not...
Clear up something. So you said this period would be like 2 weeks or a month. So anybody who comes in after that month is coming in under entirely different conditions?
You're coming in normal circumstances, and the law applies to you, etc. You come in legally. There's no visa restriction. You're entitled to be here for a 90-day period. And the law as it currently stands will apply to you. So what we're doing is we're just having and I guess the right word is an amnesty for a certain period of time, and it hasn't been decided as yet. As I say, my recommendation would be shorter rather than longer. My recommendation is likely to be the 2-week period, once we could put the necessary infrastructure in place to allow persons the opportunity to register during that period of time. But yes, to answer your question, after that registration process, if you did not register, the normal law would apply to you.
I think there'll be a rush.
Okay.
An
So-
influx. That's
Okay.
what I mean.
You understand in some cases, some of these Venezuelans may have to pay taxes. What
May
about
have to.
may have to pay taxes? What about health surcharge? Will that be waived?
Again, there's not going to be any, we haven't reached that level of discussion, but I can't foresee any waiver of legal requirements. I mean, you're registered. I think they should register with the BIR if it is possible. And the health surcharge being paid by your employer. So once they're employed, etc., that's deducted from your salary and should be paid.
Be entitled to health services? Is that what you're
Well,
saying?
again, right now, you talk about entitled, but right now there's nothing preventing persons from any country in the world, any visitor. So right now you have a visitor here for Carnival from the United States of America, and they fall and twist their ankle. They end up at Port of Spain General. There's not a requirement as you reach the Port of Spain General as a United States citizen, a Canadian citizen, a CARICOM citizen, that you pay any sum of money. All right, so that applies. Right now, that's the state of our healthcare system.
You haven't decided yet whether you are registering children.
No, I never said that. I think the question from Ms. Brijlal was, would children have access to education?
Children.
Yes, please. I mean, all Venezuelans.
Ecstasy. What have you found so far? Who are the main users of this ecstasy? Where are you finding all this ecstasy?
I have not gotten into that level of detail. I know a couple raids, the information, the report I got over the last 48 hours, there were raids. I was just reading a document sent to me between the end of December, I think is the 31st of December, so the start of this year, and the 20th of February. 1,617 ecstasy pills were confiscated. I am not sure who the users are. I'm told that it is predominantly being used in parties, but again, I don't have that level of information. I came here today to just warn persons to be aware of it. Please try to avoid it.
I mean, like, are you seeing any increase in trends or something? Increases?
Again, I haven't been given that detail, but I can tell you in our planning meetings with the heads of security, one of the things that comes up is, yes, the use of illegal drugs around carnival time. There is an escalation in the use of illegal drugs. What that is marrying with this year is we've actually had quite a few good raids and taking a lot of illegal drugs that were obviously meant for the market off of the streets, etc. So I understand the prices of drugs may have been going up, demand and supply.
Where is it? The customs, the police, which arm of law?
I am not quite sure. This was being shared to me by the persons at the Ministry of National Security who are in charge of the if I could call it, the anti-drug department. I don't think that's the official name for it, but it would be the police and stuff.
Drugs are coming from the SEC. Exactly which country it's coming from?
I don't have that information right here with me right now, but I'm sure that they do.
Then do you have any sort of special procedure in the hospitals for people who might overdose or anything on these illegal drugs and might be scared to even check in to the hospital?
Yes, there are always protocols and procedures for people who overdose, and we'll deal with that as we have dealt with in the past. Sorry?
They're scared that if they come into the hospital, they'll go to jail for an overdose.
It depends on what law they have broken.
But I don't think that is a factor that pertains. I mean, normally when they overdose, they're in a state of comatose or semi-comatose and they're brought in. It's the same thing, like you have persons who suffer gunshot wounds, they're brought in. At the end of the day, we're going to ask you, and we're going to ask questions about it.
Sometimes those people end up being handcuffed to the bed.
And rightly so on some occasions.
Mr. Dialsingh, just one more thing. Have you seen any sort of trends in the number of Venezuelans given birth in Trinidad and Tobago, and how is the health sector dealing with that? If there's any sort of influx, or if it's just like normal?
Sure, thank you. Before I answer your question, there was one point I failed to make about the Port of Spain Central Block, which I need to put out there into the public domain. The two contractors who survived into the final rounds of the bidding, one came in at 1.6 billion and one came in at just over $1 billion. I just want the public to know that the UDCOT awarded the contract to the Shanghai Group, who came in at just over $1 billion, thereby saving this country and the taxpayer about $500 million. So they passed both the technical aspect and the financial aspect of the bid. To answer your other question, Trinidad and Tobago, although you may not want to admit it, has one of the most liberal healthcare systems in the world, absolutely free to anybody, including Venezuelans. To ask if we have specific data on Venezuelans giving birth, the answer is I don't have specific data on that. But I want to reiterate, as Minister Young says, anybody in Trinidad and Tobago is entitled to absolutely free health care, especially primary health care at the accident and emergency departments, which is very liberal and needs to be appreciated.
You might feel that with the Venezuelans coming here, it may put a burden on the healthcare system. What are your thoughts on that?
So far, we are dealing with it. We have taken a decision way back as 2016 when I represented the Prime Minister at a UN conference that for things like HIV/AIDS, we treat everyone. We have taken a decision for things like communicable diseases to treat everyone, because it not only makes good sense to treat Venezuelans or anybody else for communicable diseases, it also protects the local community. Because the Venezuelans or anybody else, they don't live in a vacuum, right? So we are actually treating them for things like malaria, as you know, measles, and any other communicable diseases, because it makes good public health sense. Because as I said, they don't exist in a vacuum. They interact with the local population. So what is good for them from a public health perspective is also good for you. And I want to reiterate, you have to look at the rising rates of measles around the world. And Trinidad and Tobago has been spared that. And one of the reasons is we are treating Venezuelans and everybody else as blank slates, and we vaccinate them for measles or the influenza. And if they come with malaria, we treat them. It just makes good public health sense.
I'd just like to add something there. The government has taken a decision to act in a humanitarian manner. And yes, it would be burying your head in the sand to believe that if there has been an influx of persons, whatever the number, 10,000, 20,000, etc., that is not an addition to what you're currently dealing with. We're not going to bury our heads in the sand. We're facing it head on. We're dealing with it. We've seen, unfortunately, in the last few weeks, a worsening of the internal affairs of Venezuela. And as I kept saying, we're 7 miles off the coast, so we are the ones who are going to be directly affected, first of all, throughout the Caribbean chain. So we're dealing with it.
Any steps been taken to reach the families of the 19 girls? We had
But I see one of your reporters has been a point of contact, allegedly, for these girls. So when I asked for a report on it, the report that I got was that the girls have not been asking to go home, because obviously if they want to go home, I will find a way to facilitate that. The girls are being looked after. They continue to be looked after. We continue to provide all of the assistance we can. There's an ongoing investigation. I think 1 or 2 of them have made contact with home. It could be more than that. But certainly there has been, I asked the specific question, are any of them asking to go back home? And the answer to that was no.
that, because what I got from the story was that there wasn't the ability or the capacity to make contact with her mother. Is it that where they are in that safe house, they don't have the facilities of at least contacting their families?
The same story, I assume you're talking about the same story in the Express that I read, they made contact.
After the story,
No, the story referred to the contact, but whether they made contact before or after, etc., they're not being handed. They're not being, no, there was as I read your story, the reporter claims to have been contacted by the family and said that they want to make contact with their daughter, and got on to the commissioner of police, who then passed on the information to where the girls are at. The girls were then, or the girl was then able to make contact with her family in Venezuela. We are not providing the girls with, here, take a cell phone, walk around, do with it as you want. No, that is not happening. So what happened in that instance is actually one of the workers there allowed the girl the use of their cell phone. You have to understand, this is an ongoing criminal investigation with a lot of serious allegations. These girls were not, there was human trafficking taking place. There are a set of allegations as to their maltreatment, etc. So they need to be protected, hence the reason in their safe house, they haven't been just put back out there, etc. And when you're in safe house protection, obviously you're not going to have that type of liberty and mobility and the ability to communicate as easily as when you're outside, but it is not that they're not being allowed access to communicate. And if any of them wants to go home, we will facilitate them going home.
Minister Dale Singh, this week we had someone threatening to jump off from the roof of the Portisville Hospital. The week before that, we had someone climbing a cell tower, I think, in Maruga. Right. It really underscores what we probably already know, that mental illness continues to be a big part of this country. What's your ministry doing about it this year? We strive to make it help people.
Well, it's strange you ask that. so I'll let you in on a secret now. Just this morning, I brought a note to Cabinet, and I think I could speak about it. A note was brought to Cabinet by myself that was approved and confirmed with glee by the Cabinet and the acting Prime Minister to create in Trinidad and Tobago for the first time the post of a National Director of Mental Health, which is akin to the Director of Women's Health. This is a position that should have been created maybe decades ago. This person, for the first time, will be advising the Minister of Health on policies to treat with issues just like that. That person will also now be driving the Ministry of Health's new policy directive of the decentralization of mental health treatment away from St. Anne's. The current model of treating mental health in Trinidad and Tobago has been built around having people in St. Anne's for 20 and 30 years. The new model, which is international best practice, is to drive that centralization back into the communities so people with mental health issues can be near to their families, because many of these people can function in society, they can have jobs. But because St. Anne's is seen as the central core of mental health, you have somebody in Cedros. Can they access mental health in their communities? The answer is no. So what we are doing with this new position that the Cabinet approved today will be to treat with that issue that you have raised, Akash. It's a very serious issue, and to advise the Minister as to policy interventions to deal with the whole issue of mental health in Trinidad and Tobago, and that was approved today.
Okay, take one more question. Last question.
You intend to do a background check on these Venezuelans who are registering here to determine if they will have, probably they have criminal records back at home, to ensure that at least
Correct. I mean, it's going to be difficult to do due diligence before, all right? So what I foresee is you come in and you register, and that's why I was careful to say, if you provide us with any false information, etc., there will be consequences. So obviously on the forms, part of the form will, do you have a criminal record back home? I mean, it'll be similar to, like, for example, when you're applying for a visa away and these types of things. So all of that is being developed as we speak. And then if it is picked up, okay, but they're here. It's not, I'm not going and bringing them here, so I'm dealing with people who are here. So it has to be better registering them. They have to provide a place of address, etc., than they're just out there doing whatever it is. Persons who are engaged in criminal activity may not come and register. So then when I pick you up and you don't have any legal documentation to be here, or you're not registered, the law is going to apply. You're going to the detention center, move towards deportation, etc. Look, at the end of the day, we're facing the reality. Right now, there may be persons here, and you hear about it. There was a joint select committee recently. There are persons here in Trinidad, as in every other country. So Samru talked about what goes on in the United States. When there was a change of leadership in the United States, there was a push with ICE, and ICE officers to go and pick up people. We had Trinidadians in the United States who are not there legally, who were afraid and worried as to what would happen with them. This is not something that is unusual or unique to Trinidad and Tobago. What you're seeing for the first time is we're dealing with it properly and frontally. Developing, I've seen some facetious comments to persons, to media, that are being reported that there's no policy, it's vai, it's not well thought out. All of that is completely untrue. What you've been hearing me say, and I can't say too much about it in terms of details, is because I have to take it to Cabinet. Once Cabinet takes the decisions, all of the details, but I can tell you it's a lot of thought going into it, it's a lot of planning, and we're not reinventing the wheel. This has happened in other countries all over the world, so we will adopt what is the best practice. Okay.
Yalcin, can you give us, now that the approval has been given for the Director of Mental Health, what's the process now? How soon will that be implemented?
So first of all, we have to advertise the position. What Cabinet approved this morning was the creation of the position. What Cabinet also approved was the job description. Now we have to advertise both locally, internationally, regionally. We have to get those applications. You have to set up an interview panel and appoint. Yes, a contract position in the first instance for 3 years. But this is going to change the landscape of how we deal with mental health in Trinidad once and for all. This is a very important issue that we as a country have shied away from dealing with for decades. The old model simply is not working.
Okay, thank you all very much. I don't know. The third last question, go ahead.
What is your advice to females this carnival, and do you think there's less songs objectifying women?
Do I think there are less songs? Okay, I am gonna, now you force me to make a confession. If you ask me to name the top 5 carnival songs for this year, I will not be able to name the top 5 carnival songs, alright? Huh?
I'm sure you went to
At least what? I did go to Army Fete out of a sense of duty, but when I was at Army Fete, I went down in the crowd, I walked around in the crowd, and this type of thing, and I left after a short period of time. I have not heard on the radio as many songs as may have taken place in the past, as you put it, objectifying women, and that's a good thing. If that is in fact an accurate reflection, my colleague here may be better suited to answer that question. The truth is my head has been down focusing on safety and security for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And I think what is my advice to females for Carnival is the same advice that always applies. Be aware of your surroundings, be very careful, try to walk in groups, be aware of strangers in particular. Don't accept drinks from strangers or food from strangers, because they are, in addition to ecstasy, what they call
Roofies.
Roofies is, yes, well, I didn't know it was the technical term, but I know it as roofies, and these types of drugs that can affect your ability to function, etc., and your judgment. So just be very, very careful, and be with your friends who can look after you and make sure you're safe. And put on sunblock.
I think that these songs are degrading to our culture as a person.
Well, the question would be, which songs exactly we're referring to if you take on a general basis. I think Calypso, there's a saying by Calypso, or stories are told, and soca being the, if you want to say, the child of Calypso, they speak about the landscape. And if you would look at the Calypsonians in terms of female and male, most of our entertainers are male. And a lot on the mind of the entertainers at Carnival time maybe what they see in the public, and they would, so you would find Calypsonians speaking about the general issues within the country, within the world, and if it is soca and entertainment, you may see them speaking about what is most present to them, most important to them at this time. And the issue of objectification may just reflect the landscape of the entertainment and landscape of Trinidad and Tobago. I think I heard an issue about hooking me, and that was an issue that resonated along the Caribbean region. And I've heard mixed views on it, because there are always people who are going to see objectification in everything that happens, and then there are people who are going to not see that and see a different view on it. So I don't know that there are less, if depends on what you mean by objectification, if there are less songs about women, or if there are less songs that can seem degrading to women. There are different views on what objectification is. Some of it doesn't have to be bad, and some of it definitely, I think, based on a public view, could be better in terms of how the song puts across the message. So I don't know that there is. I don't know that I have done a study to look at all the different songs. I may know the top five. I may know the top five. However, what we see is a lot of women coming out in the public, taking their role. I saw also a view on Nadia Batson and her song, and how she is taking the fight as the woman, saying, so long I ain't see you, let me give you a wine. And so the landscape continues to evolve.
I can name 4: Family, Savannah Grass,
Hooking Me and So Long.
No, I don't know about Hooking Me. The song where there's a nightmare for us in national security. People picking up
Mr.
things
Keller,
and running with
Mr.
it.
Keller.
All right, y'all. Thanks a lot. Please have a safe carnival season.